More damning proof of coronavirus originating from Wuhan virology lab in China. India today has accessed an exclusive video of Peter Daszak, member of the WHO International Expert Group and president of EcoHealth Alliance. In the video, Daszak boasts about the manipulation of killer SARS-like coronavirus carried out by his colleagues in China. Daszak made the admission at a 2016 forum discussing emerging infectious diseases and the next pandemic. He's heard describing the process of inserting spike proteins into viruses to see if they can bind to human cells, emphasizing that the trials are being carried out by his colleagues in China. It follows growing proof of Wuhan virology lab's deep financial and personal ties to Biden's top advisor, Anthony Fauci's National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. The WHO expert-controlled EcoHealth Alliance was one of the primary proxies funneling the money into Chinese lab in Wuhan.
Then when you get a sequence of a virus and it looks like a relative of a known nasty pathogen, just like we did with SARS, we found other coronaviruses in bats, a whole host of them. Some of them looked very similar to SARS. So we sequenced the spike protein, the protein that attaches to cells. Then I didn't do this work, but my colleagues in China did the work. You create pseudoparticles, you insert the spike proteins from those viruses, see if they bind to human cells. And each step of this, you move closer and closer to this virus could really become pathogenic in people. So you narrow down the field, you reduce the cost, and you end up with a small number of viruses that really do look like killers.
This is damning proof that we're bringing to you on your screen. Damning proof of coronavirus originating from Wuhan virology lab in China. In fact, what you saw on your screens right now was the explosive video of Peter Daszak. He's a member of WHO International Expert Group and president of EcoHealth Alliance. And you saw it. You heard it in the video that he's boasting about the manipulation of killer SARS-like coronavirus carried out by his colleagues in China. My colleague Gaurav Sawant is bringing us up to speed with the very latest. Gaurav, this is the fact that coronavirus perhaps originated from the Wuhan virology lab in China, particularly COVID. And also one more question, and you can clarify this. We've also mentioned in our report how it follows a growing proof of Wuhan virology's lab deep financial and personal ties to Anthony Fauci's Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. This is an interesting one. What are you picking up more on this?
Chaiti, you've hit the nail on its head. This is actually extremely disturbing. Not just the fact that there was information that the virus originated perhaps from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, but the cover-up that lasted, and that cover-up which is extremely shameful, cover-up where organizations like the World Health...
Dr. Anthony Fauci, Peter Daszak incidentally was a part of that team. And was there an absolute conflict of interest and cover-up? You've heard that audio tape, this damning audio where Peter Daszak talks about the gain of interest, gain of function research that was going on at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. When all of this was being said at that point of time by US President Donald Trump or by then Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, the entire, as some allege, the ecosystem, it rose to tarnish it or to bring that down instead of investigating it. Precious time has been lost. China has been given an alibi. China was desperately trying to peddle the wet market theory. That wet market theory was peddled so long, and now there is evidence that's coming out. Now, this damning conversation is part one. The research that was carried out by the US lab in California, what Mike Pompeo was saying all along, the US had access to all of this information. Had pressure been mounted initially, the pressure that is being mounted now, then perhaps democracies of the world could have come together and mounted pressure on China. Unfortunately, that did not happen, and China is virtually getting away with murder, because even now it's not clear whether the US and Europe are on the same page on taking on China, especially when it comes to what was happening at Wuhan Institute of Virology.
You know, this is a shocking story that is coming in. Gaurav bringing us that explosive news report right there. Thanks, Gaurav, for joining us and putting perspective to the story as well. Now, China's role in designing the COVID virus is increasingly getting nailed. A report by US government national lab has concluded that the COVID virus could actually have leaked from China's Wuhan lab. The classified report that found its way to US media calls for more investigation. Shiv Arur with this report.
Nearly 4 million deaths. Every country on earth affected. Untold billions in damage. A bleeding world of uncertainty. Could it all have begun right here in a biological lab in China's Wuhan? Was the virus responsible for COVID-19 irresponsibly engineered here and unleashed upon the world by a careless or insidious China? Whatever the reality, the hunt for the truth has just received its biggest boost so far. A US government national laboratory report on the origins of COVID-19 has concluded it is plausible that the virus leaked from a Chinese lab in Wuhan and that this deserves further investigation. The revelation comes in a Wall Street Journal special report quoting people familiar with the classified document. The study, prepared this time last year by the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory in California, was used by the State Department under President Trump when it began the quest to nail down the origins of the coronavirus. While speculation and finger-pointing have muddied the waters ever since in favor of China, this US report is hugely damning, since this assessment drew on genomic analysis of the COVID-19 virus. The revelation comes just weeks after President Biden said he had ordered his administration to nail down the viral origins. China has totally stonewalled all global attempts to investigate the Wuhan lab. Extremely suspicious conduct, especially on the back of nearly 4 million deaths. The genomic analysis study adds meat to two scenarios widely considered to be the only two possibilities. That the virus either escaped after a laboratory accident thanks to China's extremely poor safety standards, or that it emerged from human contact with an infected animal. The big question now is whether the new report's damning conclusions from over a year ago strengthen the world's pressure on China. Bureau Report, India Today.
A Pune-based scientist couple have exposed the clear Wuhan lab link to coronavirus to Wuhan lab in China. And in an exclusive interaction with us at India Today, the couple is given compelling evidence that proves that COVID virus may have originated from a lab in Wuhan rather than a seafood market in China. Scientists Dr. Monali Rahalkar and Dr. Rahul Bahulikar did an extensive study and came across startling revelations. They found that a close relative of SARS-CoV-2 virus was collected from a mine shaft by the Wuhan Institute of Virology in China's Yunnan province. The mine shaft was infested with bats, and 6 miners who were hired to clean it were infected with pneumonia-like illness. 3 of the 6 miners subsequently died. According to scientists, Wuhan labs were experimenting on the virus, and there was a suspicion that they did some changes in the genome of the virus, making it deadlier.
So we started initially finding more about the next relative or the cousin of SARS coronavirus 2, which is RATG13, and we reached to a mine shaft in Mojang. So in China, in the southern region, there was a mine shaft in Mojang, Yunnan, and there were 6 miners which were employed to clean the bat feces in that mine. It was a copper mine, an abandoned mine. So they got ill one by one after they cleaned the bat feces, and they had pneumonia. It was a lethal pneumonia, and 3 of them had died. So we got this particular story by researching different papers, and we also found out that the Mojang mine was the place where the SARS next cousin was also collected. And so we published a small paper on this that time in May 2020.
Did COVID really emerge from Wuhan? Let's take a look at the timeline of the events right from the start of the pandemic. On your screens right now, December 31st, 2019, China informed WHO about this outbreak in Wuhan. In Jan 2020, Hong Kong activists reported the emergence of SARS from a Chinese lab. Then came Jan 2020, activists described the virus as Chinese bioweapon. At that point of time, these were activists just describing it. Then Jan 2020, there were reports in the US, UK that claimed that SARS could have escaped from a lab in Wuhan. So this report was there. 24 Jan 2020, there was a Lancet study that questioned the Chinese claim on the origin of the virus. So even Lancet had questioned it. Lancet said 13 out of the initial 41 patients were not exposed to the seafood market. This is a big one. 30th Jan 2020, UN Senator from Tom Cotton hinted at SARS-2 being a possible lab escape virus. Let's go on further. Feb 6, 2020, Chinese researchers said COVID probably originated from a Wuhan lab. So there was a growing chorus happening. 15 Jan 2021, Trump administration says first cluster of the COVID patients was from the Wuhan lab. What happened next? Feb 11, 2021, WHO said all COVID hypotheses remain open and require further study. Cut to Feb 19, 2021, the US government said China must make its data public from the earliest days of the outbreak. March 4, 2021, prominent scientists demanded full and unrestricted probe into the COVID origin. So this is how the timeline really has been. It's still open. There is more research and more evidence that is required, but the timeline increasingly is pointing towards that particular theory that it could perhaps have been a leak from a lab in Wuhan. As the world is grappling with the coronavirus, 18 top scientists have now demanded a transparent, data drive and peer-reviewed study of the coronavirus. The scientists are challenging the World Health Organization findings that it was extremely unlikely that the virus leaked from a Wuhan lab. Scientists insist this is not an academic exercise, but essential to fight the pandemic and the future waves to come. Sai Kiran Kanan in Singapore with our top story.
The average person touches their face 3 to 5 times every waking minute. In between, we're touching doorknobs, water fountains, and each other.
Beth. No, go up to your room, honey.
So we have a virus with no
A fictional virus.
no vaccine at this time.
And a real universal pandemic. Almost a decade later.
Watch this. It's transmission.
The fictional disease is a hybrid of influenza and Nipah that emerged in Malaysia in the late 1990s.
No.
As of last night, there were 32 cases.
But the origins of the real one are still shrouded in mystery. Earlier this year, the WHO's international team found no smoking gun or evidence of an accidental lab leak from its visit to Wuhan in China, the original epicenter of the new coronavirus. Its report drew criticism, and the WHO chief distanced himself from the findings. More than a dozen countries have since called for a deeper investigation to determine how the deadly virus infected humans. And now, 18 experts from the United States, the UK, Switzerland, and Canada have written a letter feeding theories that the new coronavirus might have escaped from a Chinese lab. Back in October, Pune-based researchers Monali Rahalkar and Rahul Baholikar traced the possible origins of the COVID-19 virus to a mine in southwestern China's Yunnan province, where a mysterious pneumonia-like illness sickened workers in April 2012.
The first point is about how China may have already seen small outbreaks that were eerily closer to SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19 as we call it today. This was way back in April 2012. The second point is about how this triggered a series of projects and researchers at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which specifically focused on horseshoe bats and associated coronaviruses. The third point is about the structure and the nature of the virus, which points to a possibility of the virus having been modified in a lab, and the resultant outbreak could also have been because of an accidental lab leak.
Yunnan in China is a natural habitat of horseshoe bats, believed to be hosting the COVID virus. Researchers say it's impossible for them to fly 1,900 kilometers up to Wuhan. Many experts now believe there's a strong possibility that the Chinese labs had already been working on the samples seized from Yunnan.
When the outbreak started, the virus was completely adapted to human beings, and hence there is a possibility that the virus could be modified in the lab, or there could be a backbone which was used for the construction of the virus.
Further, microbiologists found startling similarities between the Yunnan illness and COVID-19.
Our story today focuses on 3 different sets of findings, shared exclusively to India Today by eminent scientists and researchers from across the world who work for the biggest of institutions.
An eminent American microbiologist and biosafety expert, Richard Ebright, insists the Wuhan lab could have been involved in manipulating coronaviruses. Chances are that the bug that caused this pandemic is much older. Only a broader, independent investigation could firmly conclude. Was its spillover into the human population natural, man-made, or accidental? A report by Sai Kiran Kannan from Singapore for India Today.
We're slipping to a very short commercial break here on India Today. When we return, we look into the reasons why COVID and